The wind rustled through the dry leaves that blanketed the forest floor, whispering faint secrets to those who dared to listen. On the outskirts of a quiet mountain town, nestled beneath towering pines and wrapped in the fading warmth of dusk, stood a modest wooden cabin. Inside, the air smelled of old books, pine wood, and the comforting aroma of beef stew simmering on the stove. Mr. Harris sat in his favorite armchair, the old leather creaking beneath his weight as he reached down to stroke the soft fur of Max, his German shepherd, who lay sprawled contentedly at his feet. Max was not just a dog, he was family, the kind of companion that didn't need words to understand. Ever since Harris's wife had passed away 5 years ago, Max had filled the silent spaces in his life with steady presence and unwavering loyalty. They had developed a rhythm, a bond that didn't need much to thrive. Walks at dawn, meals shared in mutual silence, and nights spent listening to the crackle of the fireplace. To anyone else, it might have seemed lonely. To Harris and Max, it was peace. But tonight was different. It began subtly. Max's ears twitched, his head lifting from his paws as he stared at the wooden front door. His tail lay stiff behind him. At first, Harris didn't notice. The pages of his newspaper crinkled softly as he turned them, unaware that Max's entire body had tensed. Then came the low growl, barely audible, like a warning deep from within his chest. Harris looked down, puzzled. "What's the matter, boy?" Max didn't respond. He stood slowly, moved toward the door, and let out a single sharp bark. Not the kind that greeted squirrels or passing hikers. This one was different, urgent. Harris raised an eyebrow and set his paper aside, following Max to the window. Outside, everything appeared as it always had. Trees swayed gently. The sky was darkening, stars beginning to blink through the twilight. No one was on the road. No sounds of cars or people, just the forests breathing its nightly breath. But Max kept barking. He circled the front door, then bolted to the back, barking again, more frantic now. Then he returned to Harris and pawed at his leg. It wasn't a game. It wasn't excitement. It was panic. "Easy boy, what's gotten into you?" Harris asked, kneeling to meet his dog's eyes. Max's gaze was focused, intense. He whined softly, then tugged at his leash, the one looped loosely around the coat rack since the afternoon. "Walk," but Harris didn't understand. He stood, walked toward the kitchen to check the stove, but Max bolted in front of him, blocking the path, and then the tremor. It was subtle at first, a low hum in the bones, a shift in the floorboards. The lamp on the table trembled. Harris froze, his eyes widening. The dog had known. Max barked again, louder now, rushing to the door, slamming his body against it, clawing with desperation. Harris moved to follow him, but stopped short when the shaking intensified. Dishes rattled. In the cupboards, the hanging clock fell with a crash. Earthquake. The realization hit him as the cabin groaned, its wooden beams creaking like old bones under the weight of a great invisible hand. Harris staggered, trying to reach Max's leash, but the floor lurched violently, sending him crashing to his knees. The lights flickered once, twice, then everything went dark. Outside, the trees swayed like dancers in a storm. Inside, chaos erupted. Max snarled at his collar. He twisted and pulled, the leather digging into his neck as he tried to break free. He had to get out, had to help. His human was in danger, and the walls were closing in. Harris, disoriented, crawled toward the hallway. A support beam cracked above, then another. Dust poured from the ceiling, and with a deafening roar, the front half of the cabin collapsed inward. Silence, then a cough. Harris's voice was weak, muffled beneath debris. He couldn't move. Pain stabbed through his ribs. His leg may be broken. Breathing was hard. The air was thick with dust and the sharp scent of shattered pine wood. He called out, barely a whisper, "Max." Max heard him. The dog was pinned behind a toppled shelf, still leashed, his body trembling. He whimpered once, then resumed the battle with the leather collar, pulling until the metal buckles strained and twisted. A flicker of moonlight pierced the chaos. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Somewhere in the rubble, Max gave one final pull and the collar snapped. He was free. The wreckage groaned as he climbed over it, ignoring the pain in his legs, the blood dripping from shallow cuts. He found Harris's scent, buried deep under broken beams and insulation. He licked the old man's face, whimpered softly, circled him protectively. Harris reached out, fingers brushing Max's fur, then went limp. Max stood still. He looked around. The wreckage, no help was coming, not yet. And so, he turned away, stepping over the shattered memories of the life they'd built, and bolted into the night. The stars watched silently as Max disappeared down the dark mountain trail. The cold night air bit into Max's fur as he sprinted down the twisted mountain trail. His paws pounded the earth, weaving around fallen branches and rocks loosened by the tremors. The forest that had once felt familiar now loomed with an eerie unfamiliarity. The ground was no longer steady, and the air held the sharp metallic scent of upheaval. Behind him, the broken remains of the cabin faded into darkness. But Max didn't look back. He COULDN, single quotes T. Every muscle in his body screamed with effort, but he pushed forward. Harris was trapped, hurt, alone. Max didn't know exactly where help would be, but instinct guided him. He'd seen the orange vests before, the trucks with flashing lights that sometimes patrolled the logging roads during storms. He remembered the scent of gasoline and the sound of radios crackling. That was where he needed to go. Branches tore at his sides as he darted through the underbrush, but he didn't slow down. The aftershocks rumbled underfoot, short bursts that made the ground pulse. The world felt alive, angry. Still, Max ran. Up ahead, the mountain road curved sharply around a ridge, leading toward the valley where the rescue depot sometimes parked during fire season. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He emerged from the forest, paws slapping against cracked asphalt. Dust clung to his coat. His breathing was shallow, labored, but there was no hesitation in his stride. Then dash lights, dim, flickering, lights in the distance, a truck, maybe two. Max's ears perked, his heart surged, he pushed harder, racing toward them. As he got closer, he could make out the silhouettes of figures standing beside a utility truck. They were speaking in hurried tones, gesturing at maps spread over the hood. Their voices were drowned by the hum of generators and the distant wails of sirens far below. Max burst into the clearing, barking frantically. At first, the rescue workers didn't notice him. They were too focused on the maps, on the zones flagged as high risk. Then one of them turned, squinting into the darkness. "That a dog?" Max barked again, louder this time. He ran to the man, circled him, then darted toward the road, looking back, barking insistently. The man hesitated. "I think he wants us to follow him." Another responder stepped closer. Probably just scared from the quake, poor thing. But Max didn't give up. He grabbed the hem of the man's pants with his teeth and tugged. "Hey, easy whoa, hold on." Now the others were paying attention. The dog wasn't panicked. He was focused, intentional. One of them, a woman with a flashlight clipped to her vest, stepped forward. "This isn't just panic, he's trying to tell us something." Max let go and took a few steps down the road, then looked back. His eyes locked onto hers. Another bark, urgent, demanding. She turned to the others. "Let's follow him. What if someone's trapped up there?" The men exchanged uncertain glances, then nodded. They grabbed their gear, headlamps, medkits, thermal blankets and jumped into a four-wheeler. The woman, now in the passenger seat, kept her eyes on Max, who took off again. Leading the way into the woods, the terrain was rough. The narrow path was lined with debris and fallen limbs. At times, Max disappeared from view, only to reappear, urging them forward. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Suddenly, Max stopped. The responders slowed the vehicle to a crawl. There it was, barely visible through the trees, the remains of a collapsed structure. "Looks like a cabin," one of them said, jumping out with a flashlight. Max ran straight into the ruins, barking sharply. The woman followed close behind, scanning the wreckage with her light. "There's someone here," she shouted. The others rushed forward. Max stood atop a shattered beam, barking and whining. His tail wagged slightly relief, but his eyes remained locked on a spot beneath the rubble. They began digging. Timbers were pried away, broken furniture tossed aside, then a groan found him. He's alive. The responders worked quickly, clearing a path to Harris, who was pinned beneath the edge of a collapsed wall. His breathing was shallow, but steady. His face, coated in ashen blood, stirred as the cool night air brushed against it. Max whimpered and nudged forward, but the rescuers gently pulled him back. "It's okay, buddy, we've got him." They placed an oxygen mask over Harris's face, immobilized his leg, and loaded him onto a stretcher. Max followed closely, never leaving Harris's side. A radio crackled. "Confirmed survivor, elderly male, transporting to Ridge Hospital, ETA 20 minutes. The ambulance lights painted the trees in flashes of red and white as Harris was lifted inside. Max tried to jump in after him, but one of the responders gently caught him. "Hold on, boy, there's not enough room," Max barked, tail wagging. Nose pressed against the door. "Wish we could take you." The doors closed with a heavy finality. The ambulance pulled away. Tires crunching over broken gravel, Max chased after it. His legs, battered and bruised, carried him as far as they could. He ran down the winding road, the ambulance growing smaller, until finally he collapsed in exhaustion. He watched it disappear over the ridge. Alone now. Max turned slowly. The forest was silent again. He limped back toward the wreckage, toward the only home he'd ever known. He curled up beside the twisted frame of the doorway, resting his head on the scorched wood, and he waited. The sun began to rise over the mountain, casting a soft orange glow across the valley. Its light touched the broken remains of the cabin, first the splintered beams, the caved-in roof, the cracked porch where once a rocking chair had stood, and nestled quietly beside the ruins, unmoving but very much alive, was Max. He had not slept. His eyes remained open through the long hours of night, scanning the road, listening for the sound of tires, for footsteps, for any sign of the man he had loved more than life itself. But the road stayed empty. The wind whispered through the trees, but no voices followed, no sirens, no rescue team returning. No Harris. Max didn't understand why the vehicle had not come back. He had led them to the man. He had done what no one else could. But then the door closed. The engine roared, and he was left behind. Now, with daylight creeping over the hills, Max stood slowly. His body ached in every joint. Cuts along his legs had dried into dark, crusted lines. His paws were raw, the pads bruised from the rocky terrain. Yet none of that mattered. What mattered was the scent his master's scent still faintly lingering beneath the charred wood. Max paced the ruins, retracing the spots where Harris had been buried. He sniffed the splinters, nudged the fallen beams. The smell was fading, but he clung to it. Far in the distance, another aftershock rumbled, just enough to rattle the loose stones. Max looked up, alert, ears high, but nothing followed. Just the creak of trees adjusting in their roots. A bird took off from a low branch, wings flapping violently into the morning sky. Everything felt fragile. Max walked toward the old fence post at the edge of the property. From there, he could see the winding road where the ambulance had disappeared. He sat, tail curled around his side, and stared. Minutes passed, then hours. Still, no one came. Down in the valley, the town was stirring. Helicopters hovered above damaged rooftops. Rescue trucks crawled through narrow streets, their tires spinning over broken asphalt. People huddled in makeshift shelters. Emergency broadcasts played over radios. The earthquake had hit harder than anyone expected. Roads were cracked, bridges damaged, communication lines down. The rescue teams were stretched thin. In all that chaos, one dog waiting quietly in the woods was easily forgotten. By mid-afternoon, Max rose again. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. But the idea of leaving the cabin, of walking too far from where Harris might return, was unbearable. He circled the perimeter, checking the broken back entrance, the collapsed roof, and the spot near the hearth, where he and Harris had spent countless nights, He sniffed everything, searching for something familiar. A torn piece of a flannel shirt. The old blanket that once sat on the couch. Bits and pieces of the life they had shared, now just debris. Suddenly, his ears perked. A faint noise. A rustling. He turned sharply, ready to run, ready to greet. But it was only a squirrel, darting out from under a broken board. Max let out a soft whine and lay down, pressing his head to the earth. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. He would wait by the road, then return to the ruins. Sometimes, he ventured a short distance into the trees to find water from the nearby stream. He caught small animals when he could rabbits, rodents. But his energy waned. His ribs began to show. His once polished coat dulled with dust and sap. And rain. A local hiker passing through the area spotted him on the 5th day. A woman in her 30s, carrying a backpack and a walking stick, paused at the sight of the collapsed cabin. "Oh no," she murmured, stepping closer. Max emerged from behind a tree, barking once. She flinched, unsure. Then Max sat down, calmly, watching her eyes filled with something deeper than instinct. A plea. The woman softened. "Are you, waiting for someone?" She moved slowly, reaching out her hand. But Max didn't approach. He didn't growl either. He just stood and walked to the center of the ruins, sat again, and stared back at her. The woman took out her phone. No signal. She scribbled a note in her journal, describing the location, the dog, the collapsed home. She left a granola bar near the fence post and continued on her path, thinking someone from the town would return soon and help. But no one did. Max didn't eat the bar until the next morning. He had waited all night again, unmoving, eyes fixed. On the horizon, a week passed, then 2. Storms came, wind battered the trees, and rain soaked the earth. Max dug shallow holes beneath pieces of the cabin's roof to shield himself. He endured it all in silence. Local rescue crews came through once or twice, assessing damage. They noticed the dog, but no one recognized him. Some left food. One tried to coax him into a van, but Max refused to go. He always returned to the same spot. The porch. The ruins. The waiting dot. The story began to spread in whispers. "There's a dog out by the old cabin who won't leave. They say he pulled rescuers to his owner that night. Still there, after all this time. People brought him food. A bowl appeared. Then a blanket. But Max didn't acknowledge the gestures. He accepted them as necessities, but his focus never shifted. His vigil never broke. Season changed, summer turned to fall. The trees went gold, then red, then bare. Snow kissed the tops of the peaks, and Max remained waiting, watching, because something inside him and something, deeper than memory or logic, believed that Harris would come home. That when the moment came, he would be right here, exactly where he was supposed to be. A light snowfall had begun to drift across the mountains, blanketing the jagged rocks and broken tree limbs in a soft, silent white. The wind was gentler now, as if even nature had grown tired of the destruction it had caused. The wreckage of the cabin stood frozen in time, unchanged from the night it collapsed. And just as constant, just as unyielding, Max was still there. He no longer barked at the sound of distant footsteps. He didn't chase after the rare passing car or the snowmobiles that sometimes skimmed the trail below. He simply sat in silence, his breath puffing white into the cold morning air. His eyes locked on the road that wound away from the mountain like a question left unanswered. The world had continued without him. The town down in the valley was rebuilding. New houses were being framed. Roads were being repaired. Electricity restored. But up here, on this lonely ridge, time had folded in on itself. Every day was the same. Every night, Max curled into the same corner of the cabin ruins, beside the shattered chimney where a fire had once warmed to souls. And every morning he returned to his post at the edge of the path. The snow deepened as winter settled in. Max's thick coat offered him some protection, but he had grown thinner. His ribs showed beneath the fur now. His movements were slower, more deliberate. But his eyes, those sharp, soulful eyes, remained as bright and determined as ever. Neighbors from town came now and then. Some brought food. Others left clean water in small metal bowls. A few tried to lure Max away, offering him warmth, comfort, shelter. But each time he refused. He would sit just out of reach, quietly watching them. His body language said what he could not. This is where I belong. They called him the guardian of the ridge. A few news crews even came, cameras trailing behind weather-worn reporters. They filmed the ruins, whispered solemn lines into microphones, zoomed in on the lone dog, refusing to leave his post. But the story didn't go viral. It wasn't flashy enough. Just another sad casualty of the earthquake, forgotten as quickly as it had been found. Still, Max stayed. Then, one evening in early spring, the wind shifted. The snow had mostly melted. By then, giving way to slick mud and clusters of wildflowers stubbornly blooming between the rubble. A scent carried through the pines, faint, but unmistakable. Max lifted his head, nostrils flaring. He stood abruptly. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't. A stranger did it, was something familiar, something that stirred a memory so deep, so buried, that his legs began to move before his mind caught up. Down the road, a figure was walking slowly, supported by a cane. His coat was too large for his frame, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of time and pain. A long scar ran across the side of his face, but his eyes were the same. Harris had returned. He didn't remember much about the quake. The weeks afterward were a blur of hospital lights, machines, and unfamiliar voices. He had suffered broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, a concussion that had stolen pieces of his memory like pages torn from a book. There were whole months that existed only in fragments, but one thing remained. A name. Max, that name had echoed in his dreams. During the long nights in the recovery ward, he didn't know why at first. He just remembered eyes loyal, eyes looking back at him from the edge of a collapsing world. The doctors told him it was probably a hallucination. That trauma did strange things to the brain, but Harris knew better. And so, when he was strong enough to stand again, he took a bus to the edge of town, then hired a man to drive him partway up the mountain trail. He walked the last mile alone, cane tapping against the frozen earth, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and hope. Max rounded the corner first at full speed. He skidded in the mud, his paws clawing for grip, ears pinned back as his body flew forward with uncontainable joy. Harris dropped the cane. He fell to his knees, arms open wide, tears streaming down his face before Max even reached him. They collided in a tangle of limbs and fur and sobs. Max licked every inch of his face, whining, barking, spinning in frantic circles, then lunging forward again to nuzzle his chest, his neck, his hands. Harris held on like a drowning man gripping a life raft. "My boy," he choked out. "My good boy." Max whimpered and pressed his forehead to Harris's chest, as if making sure he was real, as if making sure the wait was finally over, and it was. The cabin still lay in ruins. The trees still bore scars from the quake, but in that moment, under the pale sun of early spring, nothing else existed. Just a man and his dog, lost and found, broken and mended. In the place where everything had fallen apart, after a long time, Harris stood again. Max stayed at his side, leaning into his leg, refusing to let even an inch separate them. They walked back to the ruins slowly. Harris took in the damage, the pieces of his old life scattered beneath moss and weathered wood. He didn't cry. Not this time. There was too much peace in his heart. He pointed to a flat spot near the edge of the property. "We'll rebuild," he whispered. Max sat beside him, tail sweeping gently over the dirt, eyes never leaving the face he had waited for so long to see. The sun dipped low again, bathing the ridge in golden light. But this time, the night that followed didn't feel so heavy, because this time, Max wasn't waiting alone. Weeks passed, and the mountains slowly bloomed back to life. The ridge, once silent and mournful, was now filled with the rhythmic sounds of hammers striking wood and saws buzzing through fresh lumber. Harris, though still moving cautiously with the help of a cane, was determined. Each day, he He sat nearby in a folding chair, giving directions to a small group of volunteers from home neighbors, strangers, even a few who had once dropped off food for Max during the long year of waiting. New cabin wasn't meant to be grand. It would be simpler than the last, just enough room for one man and his dog. But every nail driven into wood, every board laid down, felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been lost. Max never strayed far from Harris's side. He shadowed the old man from morning until dusk, occasionally rising from his resting spot to inspect the building's progress. His steps were slower now. The hard winter had aged him. His muzzle had grayed, and there was a stiffness in his back legs that hadn't been there before. But his spirit was whole again. He had the one thing he needed: Harris. Sometimes, when the workers took breaks, Harris would talk softly to Max, recounting fragments of memories that had begun returning since their reunion. "They told me I kept whispering your name in the hospital," Harris said one afternoon, leaning forward to scratch behind Max's ears. "I guess I knew you hadn't given up on me." Max blinked slowly, resting his head against Harris's knee. The two of them had found a new rhythm. Morning walks along the old trail, slow and steady. Meals eaten on the porch in progress, with Max laying close enough to feel the warmth of Harris's leg. Nights spent beneath a borrowed roof until the cabin was finished. It wasn't exactly like before, but it didn't have to be. There was something deeper now, something earned through distance, patience, and the kind of love that refused to die. The locals had started calling Max a hero. A few wanted to write articles, to share the story. But Harris always declined politely. "He doesn't need headlines," he told them. "He just needed me to come home." One morning, about 6 weeks after Harris's return, the last board was hammered into place. The new cabin stood sturdy, nestled against the same tree line as before. The porch was smaller, but the view was the same, rolling hills stretching out into the valley, birdsong drifting through the pines, and the winding road that had once taken everything away. Harris stood at the threshold with Max at his side. He took a deep breath, stepped inside, and exhaled slowly. They had made it. Later that evening, the two of them sat on the new porch, a soft breeze rolling through the trees. Harris had a cup of tea in his hands. Max lay beside him, tail occasionally thumping against the floorboards in quiet contentment. "You know," Harris said, staring out at the horizon, "I used to think I'd live out my days quietly. That peace was just about having no noise. But now, I think it's about presence. Yours especially." Max lifted his head, as if understanding every word. That night, for the first time in over a year, Max slept indoors. He curled up on a thick wool blanket near the fireplace. The new one built to resemble the old stones hand-picked from the same riverbed, the mantel carved by Harris himself, slower than before, but no less careful, as the fire crackled. Harris sat nearby, book in hand, occasionally glancing down to watch Max's chest rise and fall in the soft amber light. Peace. But their story wasn't over. In the days that followed, Harris noticed Max lingering at the front door longer than usual. He would sit facing the road, ears alert, tail still. Something in his posture had changed. It wasn't waiting anymore, it was watching. Harris thought perhaps it was habit, a remnant of all those months spent in vigil. But one morning, as he poured a second cup of coffee, he noticed Max sniffing the air with a kind of focus he hadn't seen since the night of the quake. Then came the knock. It was the woman from the rescue team, the one who had followed Max that night through the woods. She smiled warmly, holding a small box in her hands. "I didn't know if you'd come back up here," she said. "I wasn't sure either," Harris replied. "But it turns out this place had someone worth returning to." She handed him the box. Inside was a silver medallion, engraved with Max's name and the words "Service Beyond Measure." "We've started a registry," she explained, "for animals that perform acts of rescue. It's not official, just something we do to honor them. He saved your life." Harris looked down at the medallion, then at Max, who sat calmly at his feet, tail swaying ever so slightly. "I think he saved more than that," Harris said quietly. She nodded. "He waited longer than most people would. That's something rare." After she left, Harris placed the medallion on the mantel. He didn't need to say anything more. That evening, Max wandered into the yard and settled by the edge of the porch. Eyes on the trail, Harris joined him, lowering himself onto the step with a soft groan. He sat in silence, letting the quiet wrap around them. They stayed like that until the stars came out. At one point, Harris leaned over and whispered, "I think we're home now, huh?" Max gave a gentle bark, then rested his head against Harris's side. In the distance, an owl called into the night. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the porch light flickered on just enough to cast two long shadows, side by side, against the ground. Spring settled fully on the mountain, bringing with it a soft green that crawled up the hillside like forgiveness. Wildflowers pushed through the earth, dotting the ridge with bursts of color: yellow, purple, white, peach, bloom, a quiet reminder that even after devastation, life insisted on returning. The new cabin stood sturdier now. The porch was often swept clean, the windows thrown open on warm afternoons. Harris had begun tending to a small garden behind the house, kneeling slowly to plant seeds with shaking but determined hands. Max followed him everywhere, still alert, but more relaxed now. His steps were slower, his naps longer. He had earned the right to rest. They had fallen into a rhythm again. Not the same as before, but something equally meaningful. Mornings began with slow walks down the trail and ended with tea on the porch, both man and dog soaking in the golden light as it spilled across the trees. Visitors came by from time to time, neighbors bringing fresh bread, hikers who had heard the story and just wanted to see the dog who had waited. Max accepted them quietly, with cautious grace. But it was always Harris he returned to. One afternoon, a group of schoolchildren arrived with their teacher, part of a local history project about the earthquake. They stood in a circle outside the cabin while Harris spoke gently, telling them, not of the destruction, but of the loyalty that had grown from it. He waded through snow and rain, Harris said, patting Max's side. Through silence, through doubt. And I believe he never stopped believing I'd come back. Even when I forgot, he didn't. A little girl with a pink ribbon in her hair raised her hand. Was he scared? Harris looked at Max, then back at the girl. I think he was, he said softly. But he was braver than fear. He stayed. That's what courage is, sometimes. The children left with wide eyes and quiet awe, their notebooks filled with scribbles and sketches of Max lying on the porch, eyes half closed, tail brushing against the wood. In the months that followed, Harris and Max took more walks, even venturing farther into the forest. The scars from the quake were still visible: fallen trees, ridges in the earth, a small landslide halfway down the mountain, but nature had done its work. Grass had grown over cracks. Streams had shifted course but kept flowing. One evening, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, Harris built a small fire pit a few yards from the cabin. He arranged smooth stones in a circle, filled the center with dry twigs and branches, then struck a match. The flames caught slowly, curling upward like fingers reaching for the sky. Max lay beside him, his head resting on Harris's boot. He no longer flinched at the sound of cracking wood or distant rumbles. The mountain had taught them both what true noise sounded like. Everything else was just life happening. Harris stared into the flames, his voice low. I used to think I'd die up here. When that roof came down, when the dark closed in, I thought that was it. He reached down, running a hand over Max's back. But you didn't let go. The fire crackled in response. Later, as night fell fully and the stars began to shimmer above, Harris leaned back against the log and looked at the sky. You remember the old porch swing? He asked, more to himself than anyone else. We'd sit out there for hours, just listening. Max shifted, his ears twitching at the sound of Harris's voice. We've got a new porch now, Harris added, his voice catching slightly. New wood, new walls, but same air, same view, and you, still you. The next morning, the town held a small gathering at the base of the mountain. Word had spread about Max, about the quake, about what it meant to wait that long for someone you loved. There was no stage, no cameras. Just a few dozen people, some holding cups of coffee, others standing with their dogs at their sides. Harris stood before them with Max, now wearing a soft bandana around his neck, the same color as the wildflowers that grew behind the cabin. He didn't just survive, Harris told the crowd. He waited. He believed when there was nothing left to believe in. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love, it changes you. A woman from the town council stepped forward and handed Harris a plaque. On it, etched in clean, simple letters, were the words, "Max in honor of unshaken loyalty." They placed it beneath an oak tree at the edge of the ridge trail, where it would catch the light at sunset. Afterward, Harris and Max returned home. The walk was slower. Now Max stopped more often, needing time to catch his breath, but he never once hesitated. He still led the way. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in soft hues of lavender and gold, they sat together on the porch. No words were needed. The breeze carried the scent of pine and distant rain. A rabbit darted across the clearing. The fire pit still held the faintest glow from the night. Before Max shifted in his sleep, his breathing steady and deep, Harris looked down, watching the rise and fall of that familiar chest. He reached over, resting his hand gently between Max's ears. "I'm here," he whispered. And Max, without opening his eyes, wagged his tail once, slow and content. That night, Harris dreamt not of earthquakes or hospitals or broken beams. He dreamt of a trail winding through the forest, of paws padding beside his boots, of laughter carried on the wind, and in that dream, the world had no storms left to give. Only quiet, only home, only Max,